Good afternoon. This is Audrey Russo, President and CEO of the Pittsburgh Technology Council, and I'm pretty thrilled to kick off this hot week of July and welcoming Bill Strickland. And in a moment, we will bring him to the forefront. But before we do, I want to do a little bit of housekeeping. First of all, thank you to Huntington Bank for believing in us right from the onset as we kicked off this business as usual. And I guess we must be close to 75 or 80 in terms of our daily conversations. And we are going to continue to have conversations that we know are important to all of us across the tech ecosystem. And today is just another example of someone who's an innovator and a creator and doing amazing things. So I also want to thank Webb Law Firm. They've been around since 1845. They've been longtime partners of ours, and their expertise is in intellectual property. And they've been involved in big cases around the world and represent some of the best and brightest that are both in law and represent engineering and science related to intellectual property. So a couple of things: we have muted your microphones, and as a result, we don't want to hear anything in your background, and just to be considerate of our guest. And then we also have a chat, and the chat will give you an opportunity to ask some questions, but we just ask that you do not sell your wares. You're just here to ask questions and see what we can do to engage our guest as well. So on that note, I'm going to jump right in, and I am going to introduce Bill Strickland. I just want to say a few things about this man. He has an unyielding philosophy that has shaped his life and work. His environment shapes people. At 19 years old, when Martin Luther King was assassinated, riots were pervasive across most of the US cities, and Pittsburgh was no exception. He opened up a ceramic studio while a student at the University of Pittsburgh. While an esteemed potter, he graduated with a degree in American history and foreign relations. Yep. All these different things to Bill Strickland. For the next 5 decades, Bill built a world-renowned organization, cultural arts center, and vocational training school that only he has been able to build. Sure, he has had investors, philanthropy, government, investment, but no one in Pittsburgh, probably no one anywhere, had built something across these decades like what he has. He has won the following awards. These are just some of them: countless honorary doctorates. I believe he's in at least up to number 24 in terms of honorary doctorates. But in 1996, he won the MacArthur Fellows Program Award. That's a Genius Award, a grant. 2000, Strong Men and Women. 2007, Pittsburgh of the Year. 2011, the Goi Peace Award. I can go on and on. He has also written a book that is a must read, and now it's a must read for many that are actually entering college. I would say it's a must read for all of us, and it's called Making the Impossible Possible. It's important, and it's really important for now, and I would say for always. So he's also working on another book, so he tells me. So no surprise, and I want to bring right to the forefront Bill Strickland. And I want to thank you for taking the time for being with us today, Bill.
Thank you. Good to see you again, even if it is virtually.
Great to see you. Thank you for taking the time. So
Sure.
Let's just go in, then let's just jump in. So 19 years old, you live in Manchester, you're in college at the University of Pitt. It's a period of major unrest in our city as well as many across the US. What were you thinking? What were you thinking back then?
Well, I was thinking, how could I make a contribution to contribute to a positive outcome for my community, and what would be a strategy that would be ubiquitous and have the best chance of success? So I really quietly wanted to create an alternative to the riots. And because I knew a lot about the arts, I felt that that might be a universal opportunity to recruit and train many of the kids who were in paths of self-destruction in a very visible way. And I started with a row house. I lived upstairs in a sleeping bag, recruited kids from the street, and started hearing back from the school system that whatever I was doing with these kids, they were starting to show up at school more regularly. And after a while, I figured it out. there wasn't anything wrong with the kids. That affection and commitment and an aspirational idea couldn't cure. And it turns out I was right. And that particular program has now been thriving for 50 years.
Wow.
Well, how did you become a potter?
Oliver High School, 19 something, 60, 65. I was walking down the hallway of the high school. The art room door was open, and there was this white guy with a potter's wheel, and he made this great big old ceramic bowl. It was magic. I'd never seen anything like it. So I stood there at the door and said, "What is that?" He said, "It's ceramics." I said, "I want you to teach me how to do that." He says, "Well, get your homeroom teacher to sign a piece of paper that says you can come here and you're good to go." So for the remaining 2 years of high school, I cut all my classes, but I was smart enough to give the teachers whose classes I was cutting the pottery I made, and they gave me passing grades. That's how I got out of the place. And Frank says, "You're too smart to die. I don't want in my conscience, you're going to college."
Wow.
So he hounded me till I filled out an application at the University of Pittsburgh in pencil, flunked the scholastic aptitude test, never having seen it before, and got in as a probationary student. But I ended up graduating with honors, became a trustee of the University of Pittsburgh, and they gave me a PhD, and I was the commencement speaker. And my commencement speech was, "Don't give up on the poor kids. They might end up being the commencement speaker."
Nice.
So, but were you in art? You weren't in art when you went to Pitt. You went, I thought you were like in
I was a
public
history
policy.
major. I wanted to be a history teacher in public school system.
Right. So that's what you did. So you graduated from college. What was the Manchester like as a neighborhood then? Like
On
when you
fire, riots, a lot of drugs, all in a death spiral, going down big time. And it had been abandoned. When I grew up there, when I was a youngster, I used to go to sleep watching the Greek Orthodox at All Saints Day, and the women with these big white candles in their stocking feet walking down the neighborhood. And it went from that to an all-black neighborhood within 20 years.
Mm-hmm.
So I started off with what is now called a multicultural neighborhood. Back then we called it a neighborhood. And there was Italian and Slovak and German, etc., spoken in my elementary school. And the Greek Orthodox Church was there, the Russian Orthodox Church was there, etc. So I went from that to seeing the community come apart at the seams.
So here you are 19 and you start the studio and you're going to the university and you're a kid that was a leader at a very, very young age, right? I mean, you're a leader. You've always been a leader. No one's ever managed you. You've run your organization for over 50 years. So you've never worked for anyone. I mean, and
Yeah,
if
I
anyone
work for
knows
myself, basically.
right? So what were you thinking about back then in terms of leadership and community building amidst all this unrest?
I wanted to build a world-class training center in order to change the conversation about how you view people from the inner city. I wanted it to become an asset conversation, not a liability conversation. And the best way to do that was to build a world-class center that would demonstrate in physical terms exactly what I had in mind. And that's what I think we accomplished.
So when did you start drawing these plans for the Manchester Craftsmen?
When I went to see Falling Water with my high school teacher, Frank Ross, and I walked into Falling Water and said, "That's the school I want to build. It won't be a house, it'll be a school." And so I hired a student of Frank Lloyd Wright, a fellow named Tasso Katselis, to build this center. And it was modeled from the old Pittsburgh airport. And the fountain in the courtyard, and the light elements in the building, and the ambiance and the environment drove the philosophy of the place and still does.
Well, you have been unrelentless. I mean, in terms of art, beauty, high quality. in almost everything that you've done when it affects the school or any of your teachings. You've not wavered from that at all. How did you get
No.
away with that? How did you get away with that?
Well, if you don't have any money, you better learn how to talk, is my philosophy. And I didn't have any money, so I learned how to talk. So what I was able to do was to repackage poor people and have the world look at them as assets, not liabilities. And that's what I got good at. Very good at it, in fact. And we built 14 centers now around the world, including one in Israel for Arabs and Jews. So we have 14 centers open and operating around the world. And it's turned out to be a pretty interesting story.
And so what are you finding about, is there a demand now? You have 14. Are people calling you all the time for more?
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah, absolutely. We have 20 centers that are in basic early planning. Puerto Rico, Vancouver. We think next year we're going to Belfast. And we got 3 in Pennsylvania that are open and operating. Sharon, Brockway, Erie is in early planning. Westmoreland County's in early planning. Titusville's in early planning. So we've got at least 6 more on the drawing boards for Pennsylvania. And I think we can double that number in the next 36 months.
Wow. So is it your second center, was that in San Francisco?
Well, they argue about who was second, but yeah, I think Cincinnati and San Francisco were probably closer than you think, closer than they think.
Well, talk about what happened in San Francisco, because I think the tech community would be interested in knowing the origins of that.
Well, a fellow named Jeff Skull became a friend of mine, and he invited me out to Silicon Valley with a little slideshow, and I got up and showed these slides, and the guy came out of the audience and says, "Man, that was a heck of a slideshow." I said, "That's cool. What do you do for a living?" He said, "Oh, I built a company called eBay." I said, "Oh, that's cool. You got a card?" I don't have a card. And so I went back to Pittsburgh and asked one of the little techie kids, said, "You ever heard something called eBay?" He said, "Yeah, Mr. Strickland, that's the Electronic Commerce Network." I said, "Holy smokes, I met the guy that built the company." And so I called him up and I said, "Mr. Skull, I've come to have a much deeper appreciation of who you are, man." He said, "I thought you'd figure it out sooner or later. And here's $1 million." And so he gave me $1 million. And we went to a bistro in Palo Alto, and he was drawing on the napkins. And I said, "What are them circles?" He said, "This is your global strategy. We're going to scale you globally." And that's how I met Jeff Skull 20 some years ago.
Wow.
And how is it going in San Francisco right now?
Off the charts. Oh yeah, off the charts. Doing digital, video, film. They have a training center, world-class training center. That's just a gem, a model. And the kids are now spinning off social enterprises in video and film, and they're doing commercials like for a lot of the sports teams in San Francisco as well. So it has become an incubator for innovation for young people.
Wow. And so that's really fascinating. And I've been to San Francisco, and what is it called out there?
The Bayview Center for Arts and Technology, BayCat.
Okay, great. What's the most exciting project right now that you have in the hopper? You've mentioned Israel and
Yeah, we're going to Belfast, I think, next year. And I won an award called the Art Rooney Award. And they're going to give me this plaque next year on St. Patrick's Day. And the Rooney family voted unanimously for me to receive this award. And so I'm going to get the award next spring at St. Patrick's Day. And I mentioned to the Rooney family that I would like to build a center in Belfast. So we have a backer who is going to match the money that we raise, and we're going to build a center right in Belfast. Wow. Big time.
Well, so now let's talk about your entrepreneurial piece. That I don't know if everyone knows this piece of your story. It's about the recording studio. Talk about how that also came to be and how that's part of the Craftsman's Guild.
The entrepreneurial piece?
The piece about the musicians, the jazz.
Well, Mr. Ross used to bring in jazz albums all the time when I was in high school, and I dug the music. So I hired a guy later named Marty Ashby when we built the center, and he came over to me and he says, I understand you built a music hall. And I said, yeah, I did. Why? He said, well, I want to work for you. I said, well, you have a resume? He said, yeah, I got a resume. And he said, call this guy, he'll vouch for me. So I happened to know the guy was Billy Taylor. And I said, there's this white kid in here named Marty Ashby that claims he's a jazz producer. And Billy Taylor said, hire him before he changes his mind. So I gave him the keys to the music hall, and he built the jazz program from scratch. And we won 6 Grammys, and we have the highest win rate of any small record company in the world. Wow. It's turned out to be, and 600 recordings, by the way. Jeez. It's turned out to be absolutely astonishing.
Mm-hmm. And, you know, many of these jazz greats, I mean, I know you talk about Dizzy, I know you talk about Stanley Turrentine. Stanley Turrentine is from Pittsburgh.
Yes, he and his brother.
And then they helped you. So a lot of the jazz greats were actually from Pittsburgh. And
That's
yet,
correct.
Sorry to hear that today, the only remnants that we have of them is through your organization.
That's correct. I really wanted to preserve the history and the culture and the recordings, and we have all 3 going big time.
You do. Who's your
and
favorite?
We made a movie. The movie's called We Never Knew What We Had, and it features a lot of the greats in the movie that we made, and it's turned out to be I think what's going to be a world-class movie celebrating the artisanship of jazz musicians from Pittsburgh.
When is that going to be released?
It has been released, and
released.
Yes.
Okay.
Last year, I think it came out, and we were featured. Manchester Craftsmen's Guild and a lot of the artists from Pittsburgh were featured in the movie, including George Benson and Freddie Cole, who we just lost, etc. And so these icons of the music came here, played, celebrated the music, and I'm just sorry that Mr. Ross died before he saw his student build this center to celebrate this music.
Wow. Was George Benson from Pittsburgh?
Yes. He went to Conley Vocational School, and they used to call him Crazy Georgie because he'd walk up Center Avenue with this guitar with 3 strings, playing for quarters in the barbershops. And, well, he ain't crazy now.
He's not crazy now.
And as it turns out, I was on a plane to Australia with him and thanked him for his contribution to the world of music. He's a wonderful man.
Wonderful playing, yes. Quite. In many ways, it's a bit of a tragedy that we still don't have the presence of all of them. But thankful for the work that you've done to keep that alive. And
yeah, Marty Ashby is the guy who really built this thing, and it's turned out to be legendary. And everybody who's anybody has come through here or is coming through here. So it's just been a great ride.
It's true.
I went back to doing my own jazz recordings with Marty in the studio. So I've got about 6 shows out now, and which I sit up in the studio and just pick music at random and comment about them, and they turned out to be pretty popular.
That's great. I think you did a TED Talk with
who
played the piano?
Herbie Hancock.
Herbie Hancock, right. Herbie Hancock plays, if anyone ever heard about this, go to one of the TED Talks, you'll find it. And you'll see Bill Strickland riffing about his history with Herbie Hancock playing quietly, but in a clever way, which is really
900,000 hits. It's one of the top 10 TED Talks of all time.
That's what I love about you. That's what I love about you. So let's fast forward just quickly, and not that we can solve all the problems, but today, these times, are they different than 1968? Is this a true inflection period for America? I think 68 was?
I believe this is an inflection period because the sensibilities are so much enlightened, in part because of the pandemic, in light because of George Floyd, in light of the fact that, you know, the country knows it's in trouble, and a lot of these iconic Civil War figures are coming down as they should have come down many years ago.
Mhm.
So I think the country is trying to realize or re-realize its conscience, and before it's too late. And I think that the people in Germany talking about George Floyd, who can't even speak English, or celebrating the life of this extraordinary man, is an inflection point. When the Confederacy outlaws the showing of the Confederate flag at NASCAR, that's called change.
And we didn't see that in 1968, is what you're saying.
No. No, what we saw in 1968 were people getting shot, and back then they were getting shot and unrecognized. Now, at least, they're getting shot and recognized. So we're trying to do something about what the Black community has known for years, that, you know, 1,000 Black folks got killed by the cops last year. Only a small percentage of them were even taken to court. That has changed.
So you have hope.
I live on hope. That's my profession, hope.
That is your one of your taglines, right?
Yeah. Jeff Skoll said, "You manufacture hope as a commodity. That's brilliant because that can be scaled globally."
Wow. So that in the world of tech and entrepreneurism, there was something called Harbor Gardens.
Yeah.
What is Harbor Gardens?
Well, that was my venture into real estate. I decided I wanted to build a real estate building, so I did. And it's turned out to be pretty successful, very successful. And the greenhouse is actually basically attached to the building. So we built a 40,000 square foot high-tech greenhouse and a 60,000 square foot office building that turned out to be a commercial enterprise that generated revenue, and we paid off the building and we made $500,000. So I did all right for my first real estate venture.
You did. You did. So did you always know you were an entrepreneur?
Oh, yeah.
You knew since when? Since you were 19?
I was always selling something to somebody. Back then, I won something called the MacArthur Genius Award, because they give you money for saying out loud what you used to say under your breath, as Dick Gregory would say. And so I figured I could sell anything. And so I have based my life on those principles.
But you also were probably one of the few, if only, Black men that would go to the Duquesne Club, raise money on your terms, and then execute amazing things.
Well, that's the key. The execution is the key, not having the idea. Lots of guys are walking, women are walking the street with ideas, so what? The issue is, can you build it? And more importantly, can you sustain it?
So how did you get, did ceramics and pottery give you the confidence?
Yeah, I'd say that. Well, that plus I ended up, I don't know if somewhere in my book, I flew 727s also. I flew for Braniff Airlines. And that experience alone, plus ceramics, plus building the center, all of those elements really created a sense of being invincible. I figured if I could figure out how to fly 727 with no background in math, I could do anything. And so I did.
So what advice do you have for the rest of the world when it comes to confidence?
Well, you have to start off clearly about where you're headed first, and then figure out how to get there. But you got to know where you're going, or I guarantee you're never going to get there.
And this is from a guy who got into the University of Pittsburgh on probation, who was brought there by his ceramic teacher.
That's basically right. Well, and my mother, who raised me in such a way that she believed in me even when I didn't believe in myself.
Which is really important. So, you have been a part of, you've been an integral part of Pittsburgh's, political policy, economic development. You've sit on boards, civic engagements, in addition to all the things that we've articulated. So what's your guidance to us now in Pittsburgh? What's your guidance at, this whole side effect of the pandemic?
Well,
and the anticipated changes that we're going to return to or not return to. What do you want to say to us? What do you want to yell at us?
Well, I don't want to yell. I want to encourage.
Okay.
And by that, I mean, we've got to use this as an opportunity to elevate the circumstances of African Americans, of people of color, big time. Our community, the African American community, was suffering the pandemic before the pandemic. And we've got to use this as an opportunity to change this conversation. The pandemic has only revealed what has been going on all along. And we now have an opportunity, I believe, to really marshal the forces to change the trajectory of people who are economically distressed. I think that the economic opportunities will ultimately solve most of the social issues. If you have a salary that pays you a living wage so that you can buy a house, educate your kids, et cetera, your health care falls into place, the opportunity for your children to get an education falls into place, et cetera. That, I believe, ought to be one of the keys really to the emancipation of inner city people in the economic side.
How do you think public education's trending right now in Pittsburgh?
Well, I think public education is trying to figure out how to elevate the technological profile of its students because they're challenged. And the technology gap, as you know, I'm talking to the Technology Council, is widening, not shrinking.
Right.
And the school system needs to be assisted in closing that gap, big time.
What do you think we should be doing, though? I mean, you think we should be building more craftsmen's guilds? Should we be?
But absolutely. No, absolutely. But what we should be building is a political and economic infrastructure that can sustain ideas like the one we've been talking about. That's where the decision-making process has got to go. So that, in other words, public policy has got to be developed in a way that elevates this consciousness to a level where it is doable and, more importantly, sustainable. And I don't have far to go to look for a workforce. I have, 4 cases at the Harvard Business School. Here's the Trivial Pursuit question of the morning. Who are the only 2 people in the world who've ever got 4 cases at the Harvard Business School? I'm one.
Let me see. Would it be Bill Strickland?
And
I don't know. Who?
Steve Jobs.
Come on.
That's true.
Okay, that's awesome. Okay, so
when I went to the Harvard Business School, I said, don't go far. You're going to be my workforce that helps me change the planet.
So, but here we are in Pittsburgh, the pandemic hits, it becomes so evident the digital divide is more profound than anyone would have thought. It is wretched. We in the tech community worked with neighborhood allies in Aurora and Google to get kids brand new devices, everything they needed, worked with Comcast to get Wi-Fi, make sure people had what they needed, but the divide is huge. And it's not just throwing laptops, even though that's a great place to start. But the world, according to Bill, would say that's not the answer.
That is one of the answers. It has to be a multiple tiered strategy. Building the environment, which I religiously believe in, because every center that we built is not a poverty center, it's a world-class training center. That's not a play on words, that's a way of thinking about people who are distressed. And by the way, race has nothing to do with this concept. Poverty is poverty, and economic opportunity is economic opportunity. 4 of our centers don't have black students, they have poor white students. But the methodology and the environment is the same.
So back when you started the Craftsman's Guild and you started doing the work while you were an undergrad, Pittsburgh was a very different town. It was a big corporate town. All the corporate, we were like number 3 in Fortune 500 companies that had corporate leaders here. It's changed since. And so the group that you're talking to now is the next iteration of leaders. We're in tech, we're in small businesses, we're in mid-sized businesses. A few are in a few of the large corporations, but actually working in tech. So what's your advice to us? We're representing the next iteration of Pittsburgh post-COVID. A lot of people working from home, a lot of people looking at what it's like to work. We're seeing a lot of people left behind.
Join the movement. I'm determined, with your help, to change this conversation. The pandemic has just slowed me down for the moment, but it hasn't changed anything. I'm still headed in the same direction, and I need very smart people, present company included, to help me get there. And we got to make a lot of noise consistently and permanently. And that's how this conversation, I believe, will change. If you don't think that's true, let's dial it back to I'm a black kid at Oliver High School, gets into college on probation, went to MacArthur, has 4 cases at the Harvard Business School, and 24 honorary PhDs. So I must have, and flew 727s and have a captain's rating. So the point of the story is, don't give up on the poor kids. They might end up being the solution to the problem.
Well, we can't get rid of the, not pay attention to the poor kids because, intelligence level is equally distributed.
That's
it's
correct.
Really important that we're leaving people behind. We're leaving all people behind.
That's correct. And that's got to change or the country's not going to make it.
So what's your parting words to us? We've spent more than 30 minutes with you. You're amazing. It's always a treat for me to have a conversation with you. If you haven't seen any of his TED Talks, if you haven't read his book, you need to. You just have to. Share it with your kids, share it with your friends. He is one of the most positive people I've been around that is just filled with practicality, not naive optimism. So what's your parting words for us? What do you want us?
What my parting words are, join the movement. I have no intentions of backing away from this. Tell everybody that you can touch, even people that you can't touch, about this crazy black man from the north side who has the nerve to think he can actually change the planet. And the man's not crazy. You can tell him that part too.
And so if people also need to buy any music from the greats, the money actually goes right back to the Manchester Craftsman's Guild. It's highly profitable. Correct. And it goes right back. And he's been able to amass the greats of jazz to do recordings, and that money goes right back into the work that he started. So
and
this
we have, and the book, we're now close to 100,000 in sales. And so, and the audio recording, I donated all that money back to the center.
Wow, that's incredible. You are an icon. People have written amazing comments about you in the chat. I don't want to take up any more time. Your time is precious. You are precious to all of us. And for more information, you can actually go to bill-strickland.com. He's got a website of his own. You can see all the things that he's done. And I can't thank you enough, Bill, for just being a good friend and a leader and always being so candid and authentic.
I'm certainly the #1 Audrey Russo fan, and I noticed that you're taking good care of that platter I gave you, and that makes me very happy to see that. So have a good
Love
day
it.
to everybody.
Love it. Thank you. Thank you, everyone, for joining. Thank you. I know there were some questions, mostly were statements. Thank you, Jonathan, for being with us. You're right, Courtney. He's a living legend. He is a good man, but you can't mess with him. Don't think he's good, but he's tough. He's tough. So thank you, everyone. This is recorded as well. And if you want to know more about the Manchester Craftsman Guild and anything else, it's easy to find, easy to contribute to. And stay tuned because Bill Strickland still has a lot to do.
Amen. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.